My castaway this week is a musician, a chorister at Westminster Abbey from the age of 8 and later on an organ scholar at King's College, Cambridge. He was almost bound to enjoy a career in the art in which he's so accomplished. And that, apart from his time as a soldier in the last war when he was awarded the Military Cross, is exactly what he's done. He's held 3 important posts: Director of Music at King's College, Director of the Royal College of Music and Conductor of the Bach Choir. He is, in a sense, England's choirmaster, loved and listened to by all those who love listening to and singing in Christmas carol services and the great choral works of Bach, Handel, Elgar and the rest. He is Sir David Willcocks. Your career, Sir David, does sound like a kind of lifetime's labour of love. Is that how you feel about it?
Well, looking back on it, I feel how lucky I've been to be doing just what I love and being paid for it as well.
Which is what is making music with people you get to know, with friends. It's just that whole coming together.
It is. It's something you share with others. And I think that if somebody is occupied in their life doing things which they really enjoy in the company of other people, they can't ask for anything more.
And what are the prerequisites of the job? What do you need? What kind of character, what kind of personality do you need to be a good choirmaster, as it were?
I think, first of all, you must have natural talent. You've got to have a good ear for music, and you've got to love music and try and convey that love to others. And I think your task is to extract from other people the very best that they can give.
And have you modelled yourself on anybody? Because I know when you were very small, choir boy, you were conducted by Elgar himself, weren't you?
That was just on one occasion in St James's Park when I think I was probably 10 years of age. It was the unveiling of the statue to Queen Alexandra, and Elgar, as Master of the King's Music, came dressed in his court dress and conducted the choirs of Westminster Abbey, St Paul's Cathedral and the Chapel Royal. And I'll never forget the charisma of that man. I was on the end of a row, and I thought he was watching me the whole time, but the little boy at the other end of the row told me that he was watching him. But I remember distinctly that military-looking figure directing us. I can't say whether he conducted well or badly, but I certainly was awestruck.
And so, obviously, he made an impression. And is that something that you've always tried to do, then, that everybody in the choir should feel that you're there for them?
Well, I'd like to think I'd got that ability, but I don't think I have necessarily. I do try and embrace everybody in my gaze, because I think everybody in a choir and everybody in an orchestra is important.
Isn't that how you found your wife, though? She thought you were looking
Indeed.
her in the eye.
Well, she was the only person who was watching me in the that choir which I was conducting.
But it's a job, it's a career, as I understand it, that you would never have arrived at if it hadn't been for a certain Cornish piano tuner.
That's correct. My father and mother thought I ought to start piano lessons, which I had, and they very early discovered through the piano tuner that I had perfect pitch, because I told him that he hadn't tuned the B flat very well. And I was at the other side of the room. He said, "How do you know it's B flat?" I said, "I just know it's B flat."
And you were how old?
I think I was then 6. He suggested to my mother that she take advice as to what her little son should do, and she arranged for me to have an interview with Sir Walford Davis, who was then Master of the King's Music.
And it was to be a turning point at a very, very early age, as we shall hear. But first of all, let me hear about your first record.
I would like Zadok the Priest by Handel, written for the coronation of King George II and Queen Caroline in Westminster Abbey, because that is one of the pieces of music which I remember vividly singing as a boy in Westminster Abbey with the King and Queen there. They would come every Maundy Thursday, and we would sing that piece. And it's never sounded quite the same for me since. The excitement of singing it in the very building where Handel conducted it himself, and to see his statue there in the south transept. And it was wonderful for a small boy to be in the midst of all this beauty.
choir of King's College, Cambridge, singing part of Handel's Zadok the Priest with the English Chamber Orchestra, conducted by my castaway, Sir David Willcocks, and indeed sung by him as a chorister in Westminster Abbey in the late 20s. So, tell me, Sir David, then how you came to be there, from all the way from Cornwall, as a boy aged 8.
Well, Sir Walford Davis recommended that when I was 8, I should go for an audition to Westminster Abbey.
So you'd sung for him, had you? And he
yes, and he tested
voice.
my ear. In fact, he played a chord on the piano and said to me, "Can you hear God speaking to you when I play that chord?" And I listened carefully, but I couldn't. But I didn't want to let my mother down, so I said, "Yes, sir, I think I can." So he said, "Then you're a true musician." And he said no more to me other than give me lots and lots of ear tests.
Have you felt guilty about that ever since?
I have, yes. I've lived with that guilt.
And so he recommended
that I should audition for a place at Westminster Abbey, and I think he wrote a private note to the then organist, Dr. Ernest Bullock, saying, "I commend this little boy to you."
And do you remember what you sang at that audition?
Yes, I do. I shudder when I think of it. It was a little piece called The Keeper. And Ernest Bullock said to me, "I'd like to hear you sing something." So I said, "Well, I've got a piece called The Keeper." So he said, "Give me the music and I'd like to accompany you." So I said, "Oh, no, sir, I'd rather play for myself because the accompaniment a bit tricky." So he said, "Very well, my boy." And I staggered through this, making lots of mistakes. But he was so nice. He sort of said, "That was quite a good attempt, my boy."
Didn't occur to you that he could sort of...
No, I thought the organist of Westminster Abbey couldn't manage anything in two sharps.
So you got in.
I got in.
So you were sent all the way from home on the train up to Westminster Abbey, and that's where you were. Did you get homesick?
Well, of course, I think any small boy, age sort of 8, first time away from home. And I remember lying awake all night listening to the chimes of Big Ben, because the choir school is in Dean's Yard, just near the Abbey. And I cried my eyes out that first night, but after that I was blissfully happy for my 5 years.
And did you write lots of letters home?
Well, I wasn't very good at that. We were supposed to write home once a week, but I had a much better way of telling my mother that I was well and happy, because in those days Evensong was broadcast from Westminster Abbey every Tuesday afternoon. I think it was at 3 p.m. And I devised a little scheme whereby she should know I was all right. When the dean came to the end of the second lesson, he would say, "Here endeth the second lesson." I'd go like that, and my mother down in Cornwall would know that I was well and happy. That took the place of my weekly letter home.
And have you felt guilty about that ever
I
since?
felt guilty about that. I'm ridden with guilt.
Tell me about record number 2.
Well, I'm going to be ridden with guilt again, because all the records that I'm going to choose in this programme are ones which remind me of people whom I've respected and admired, or places where I've been very, very happy. My next record is in remembrance of Boris Ord, who was my mentor when I was an undergraduate at Cambridge and taught me everything, I think, that I ever learnt about choir training. This record is of Adam Leigh Bounden. I think it's his only composition which is generally well known. It's sung, of course, very often at the Festival of 9 Lessons and Carols from King's College, Cambridge.
The choir of King's College, Cambridge, singing Boris Ord setting of the carol Adam Leigh Bounden, conducted by Philip Ledger. So after Westminster Abbey, Sir David, you got an organ scholarship to Clifton College, Bristol. How unusual was that then in the 30s, you know, for a school to offer any kind of music scholarship?
Well, there were very few public schools, I think, at that time that did offer musical scholarships. Clifton was one and Rugby was one. And while I was there, I came under the direction of a wonderful man called Dr. Douglas Fox, who lost his right arm in the First World War. And it was a tragic thing because he was a very, very gifted young man who had a great career ahead of him, probably as a professional pianist. But he lost his right arm, but became, as a result, a wonderful teacher. And I owe a very great deal to him.
So to that extent, his loss, as it were, was your gain. Did he try to teach you to do the things he would love to have been able to do himself?
Yes, and it was he taught me also never to be sorry for yourself. He was a wonderful man, and many generations of Cliftonians and of others benefited from his character and from his tuition.
So your musical education was altogether quite character building, as well as you're enjoying the music. I mean, do you think that's true of music and choral singing generally? I mean, it's what we were touching on in the beginning, that sense of camaraderie, of combined purpose.
Yes, I think it's like sport. I mean, if you're a member of a football team, you have to learn to live with others, to recognise the part that you play. And I think if you're singing in a choir or playing in an orchestra, it's that shared experience about which we spoke.
Record number 3.
My third record is the Dies Irae from Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, because that will remind me of my comrades during World War II, and also of the benefit, I think, that I personally achieved through service in the army for 6 years. In some way it was wasted, those years, but in other ways I'm very, very grateful I experienced them.
Bach Choir and the London Symphony Orchestra and Chorus, conducted by Benjamin Britten, performing part of the Dies Irae from his War Requiem. And memories for you, Sir David Willcocks, of friends you lost in the war. You'd have been, just 20 when you were called up in 1940, 1 year into your organ scholarship at King's. Did you find time or place in the army to make music?
Yes, I always used any opportunity that I could. Generally, where we were billeted or stationed, there would be a piano or an organ somewhere near. And I used to amuse the troops by playing dance music of the time.
You were, after terribly young, just 20, to suddenly find yourself in the middle of war. You won the Military Cross.
Yes, well...
How did you do that?
Well, I didn't do anything which one wouldn't do in the normal course of duty. And I suppose I was in command of some men who were extremely brave, and as so often happens on these occasions, the person in charge gets the reward, and the people who are braver don't.
But where were you? What were you doing?
I was in Normandy, and I was an intelligence officer with my battalion, and my task was to advise the commanding officer of the information available to us at the time, the position of the enemy troops, the position of our own troops. It helped him to form his strategic plan.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? It all seems such a long way away from where you had been, Cambridge, and making music and cathedrals and organ music and so on. And yet I wonder if there isn't something there in common. Again, it's this comradeship, isn't it? It's this sense of sharing of...
Exactly. And I don't regret those 6 years. I wouldn't want my own children or grandchildren to have those years, because in some ways they were wasted years, but for me personally, I think I learnt the value of discipline in life, and I learnt how to make the best use of what you actually have to hand, and not to grumble. I don't say that nobody in the army ever grumbles, because that would be an untruth, but I mean, you learn to live with what you've got.
But did you ever consider not going back to your organ scholarship? To stay
Well, I did, actually, because when we were interviewed on being demobilised, the general who sort of interviewed us said to me, don't you think it would be foolish to go back to music now? Because if you stayed on for another 10, 15 years, you could probably have a good military career and then retire on a good pension and then do your music without any financial worries.
You tempted?
I was tempted for an hour or so, but then when I'd slept on it, I decided to go back to King's, and I've never regretted it.
Next piece of music.
The next is part of Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis. It'll remind me of the man who influenced me greatly when I was at Worcester. He was a wonderful composer, but a beautiful character.
Part of Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, played by the Sinfonia of London, conducted by Sir John Barbarolli. And memories, Sir David, of Worcester Cathedral, where you were organist in the 50s, and you'd been at Salisbury Cathedral before that. How well did you come to know Vaughan Williams then at Worcester?
I got to know him very well because he used to come to each of the Three Choirs festivals, and he was the dominant figure. He replaced Edward Elgar, who had been sort of the grand old man of English music for so long. And what I admired about Vaughan Williams was his essential humility. Here was a great man in his late 70s, early 80s, who was prepared to talk to people of my age as equals. And I remember asking him very often when I was conducting his music with him there, I said, please tell me, if I'm doing exactly as you would wish.
Incredibly intimidating.
Yes, and he said, you do it how you feel it. I've written the music, and it's up to others to interpret it. And I thought, what a modest man.
Did he ever conduct it himself?
Yes, he did. Sometimes it was terrifying, because by then he was 78 or 9, and I think he was actually 82 when he conducted the first performance of his piece Hodier in Worcester Cathedral. We were all very nervous on his behalf because his sight was failing and his hearing had started to go as well. But at the final rehearsal, things ground to a halt because his beat wasn't very clear. Now, most conductors would have blamed the choir. They'd have blamed the orchestra and said, no, watch me more carefully. He banged the desk and said, I've told you 100 times, don't watch me. And everybody thought, what a wonderful man. And it went beautifully in the evening at the first performance, and I shall always remember that as a lesson in humility.
And then in 1957, you were offered the big job at your alma mater, Director of Music at King's College, Cambridge. You've been quoted as saying, because you took it, obviously, and spent the next 17 years there, you've been quoted as saying that it was the most important part of my life. Why do you feel that?
Well, I think each chapter of my life has been enjoyable, but I think the importance lay in the fact that the long-playing record was being developed during those years, and it was the excuse to record a great deal of music, some of which hadn't been sung perhaps for 400 years.
So it was the advent of the LP, really,
yes.
and stereo sound as well, I think.
Yes,
at the same
and
time.
we even had one or two records in quadraphonic sound, but they were very short-lived.
That all went away. How did you persuade the boys? I mean, what's the technique of these little boys? How do you give them the confidence in that moment to hit those top Cs just at the moment when it really matters?
Well, I would generally have 3 or 4 boys who were capable of singing the solo at very short notice, and I always felt it was unfair to tell them a week before that they were going to do the solo, because that would give them time to get nervous if they were, or even worse, their parents would get nervous.
And the grandparents.
And the grandparents, and they would write saying, don't be nervous, dear, don't have too much chocolate cake beforehand, whereas little boys don't get nervous at all. They're not aware that millions of listeners are tuned into them.
But they don't get nervous if they don't know they're going to have to do it. But
no.
They're also keyed up because they might.
They're keyed up so that they might. And I felt it was better that way, and I think my successors have adopted the same attitude.
And how did you tell them? I mean, did you have the whole choir in front of you? And
yes, they'd be gathered there, and the red light would come on, and you would point.
Tell me about your 5th choice.
My 5th choice is of Roy Goodman singing part of Allegri's Miserere, a piece of music which we always sang in King's College Chapel on Ash Wednesday. Roy Goodman then, I suppose, was aged about 13, and I think on the day when we recorded it, he'd been playing football and ran all the way to the chapel in order not to be late for the recording session, having had no time to change, arrived with muddy knees, and sang most beautifully, as though he'd been lying down resting for 3 hours, which was not the case. Roy Goodman and King's College Choir singing part of Allegri's Miserere, conducted by my castaway,
Sir David Willcocks. You then, as well as your day job at King's, as it were, took over the Bach choir in 1960. How can you define it for someone who doesn't know exactly what it does? I suppose it's the most serious amateur choir there is, isn't it?
But I'd like to think so. They're dedicated people. None of them are paid, although many of them are professional musicians, and they come every Monday evening to Westminster Cathedral Hall to rehearse, just for the joy of singing.
And they have to audition?
Yes, they
Very
have
rigorous audition.
quite a rigorous audition, particularly from the point of view of sight reading. I'm less interested in the quality of the voice, provided
Why?
a man or woman can sing beautifully in tune, because the Bach choir numbers some 250, and there the individual quality of the voice is less important than the ability to blend well with others and to read at sight, because the repertoire of the choir is very large and we do a lot of concerts each year, and therefore sight reading is an absolute essential.
And you only meet on a Monday night together. I mean, can you hold a choir together in that way when you're
Well, I
only
try
meeting?
to.
So wherever you've been in the world over these 38 years you've been in charge of the Bach choir, on a Monday night you've always been in London for rehearsal?
Just very occasionally I've been abroad and haven't been able to get back, but I've always made Monday night a priority for the Bach choir.
And tell me about the sound. I mean, the sound generally, I mean, with King's as well, that you produce. How much is the sound of a choir dictated by the choirmaster, by his ear?
A great deal, I think, because a choirmaster naturally doesn't want to live with a sound which he doesn't like. And I think you encourage the sort of sound that you do want. And of course, the training, the voice production is very, very important.
But take the boys at King's, for example. I mean, how does the sound that you got from them differ from, say, the Vienna Boys Choir?
Well, I think it is that you train on certain vowels and you do exercises and you eliminate things that you don't like. You don't want, in English choirs, we tend not to want too much vibrato, whereas in some of the foreign choirs there's a large element of vibrato and they think that our singing is unemotional and cool, whereas we think that they are over-romantic. So it's just a matter of taste, and I think nobody can say that one type of tone is right and another is wrong. It's rather like wines. Some people like a sweet wine, some people like a dry wine. So with beauty of tone, some people like a brighter tone than others. I know what I like, and I work towards that always.
And now, after 38 years, it's all over. You've given them up. Is it like the end of an affair? Does it break your heart?
But it does break one's heart because you get very attached to the choir as a whole and to the individuals. They're your friends. It's like a bereavement in a way, but I'm not saying that I'm never going to see them again, because I shall take the keenest interest in the choir, and I've got the greatest confidence in my successor, David Hill, who's a fine musician, and incidentally taking over the choir at exactly the same age as I did 38 years ago. He's 40.
And in the meantime, you get your Monday nights back.
I get my Monday nights back, yes.
It's got a smile on your face for that, hmm?
Yes.
Record number 6.
My 6th record is, of course, one of the Bach choir singing, because I would love on my desert island to remember the choirs with whom I've worked and the people with whom I've worked. I think, the Choral, O Sacred Head, from the St. Matthew Passion, which the choir performed 3 times a year in recent years and 2 times a year throughout most of my time. So I suppose we've done 80 performances together.
The Bach choir singing the chorale O Sacred Head from Bach's St Matthew Passion with the Thames Chamber Orchestra conducted by Sir David Willcocks. How much did it break your heart, Sir David, in 1974 to leave King's for the Royal College of Music, I wonder?
Well, it was a big wrench. Of course, again, it was like leaving one's family. I'd got to know generations of boys and generations of young choral scholars, and I felt very much part of the college. But the Royal College of Music was a very exciting job. It's one of Britain's leading conservatoires.
All those distinguished predecessors.
Exactly.
George Grove, Hubert Parry.
Parry.
How could you say no?
Well, exactly. And Hugh Allen, who nurtured Douglas Fox, who was one of my teachers, and Ernest Bullock, who was one of my predecessors. He was the man who I didn't trust to play my piano accompaniment, and he, when I'd occupied the director's chair, he said how lovely it was that the little boy who didn't think I could play a piece in D major should be occupying the director's chair as one of my successors.
So a great sense of tradition, obviously, has been very important to you throughout your career. But what's very interesting, I think, for a man who's spent a lifetime in cathedrals and chapels making religious music is you're not, I think I'm right in saying, particularly religious.
Well, it depends what you mean by religious. I think I feel deeply the beauty of the religious poetry and the religious music which has been composed. But I think in 2 minutes or 3 minutes you can't describe exactly what your beliefs are. I mean, much of the Christian creed I accept without any reservation. Some I find great difficulty in accepting. And I think on my desert island I shall hope to have the space and the quiet to think things through, because I think the whole of one's life is a search for truth, and it's no good trying to delude yourself if you don't really believe things.
Record number 7.
My 7th record is of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. This is played by the Hanover Band, and I wonder if any of your listeners will guess who's conducting. It's none other than the little boy, Roy Goodman, whom we heard singing part of Allegri's Miserere a few moments ago. And I like to think that the experience which he gained as a small boy singing in the King's College Choir had a considerable influence upon his subsequent development. He's a very fine violinist and a wonderful conductor, and I'm very, very proud of him.
Part of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, played by the Hanover Band, conducted by Roy Goodman. What about your family, David? You produced 2 boys and 2 girls. Did they follow in your musical tradition?
Well, one did. My elder boy, Jonathan, is a professional musician, and I like to think that he had the same sort of opportunities I did when I was young. He sang as a boy in the King's College Choir for 5 years.
One of your daughters sings in the Bach choir.
Yes, she does. Yes, she has to get auditioned by her father, which is rather terrifying.
But you'll miss them all, I'm sure, dreadfully on your desert island. You'll miss your choirs, the camaraderie we've talked about. Will you survive without them all, do you think?
Well, I think I'll have to. I think the army again trained me to make do with what you've got and adjust as quickly as you can. And I did, after all, as a cub and as a scout. I think I got a fire lighting certificate and I got a little badge for cooking. So although I've never been a good cook, never even done more than open a tin. I think I would get by somehow.
And Desert Island apart, you know, you've left, in any case, a lot of this behind you now as you move towards your 79th birthday. What will you do now with all the time you have on your hands? Or are you, like so many musicians and opera singers, booked up for years to come yet?
Well, I'm booked up for 2 years to come anyway. Then I may wind down. I shall go on as long as people want me to go on, genuinely. And I think I can tell whether they're asking me because they want me or they're asking me because they're sorry for me.
Record number 8, last one.
Well, my last record is one which will remind me of my family, of the joy I've had from them all. And the only one of them has actually composed anything, and that is my son, Jonathan Willcocks. And I'd love, for my last record, to have the Bach choir singing The Holly and the Ivy, which he was asked to write by the Bach choir in honour of my 70th birthday. The Bach choir singing The Holly and the Ivy, arranged by my castaway son, Jonathan Willcocks, with the Graham Ashton Brass Ensemble, conducted by Sir David Willcocks. If you could only take one, Sir David, which would it be? Well, I think it would have to be music of Bach, which has been a lifelong love of mine. So it would be the Bach choir singing O Sacred Head from the St. Matthew Passion.
What about your book?
Now, my book, I think, would be a book on astronomy, because it's a subject I know absolutely nothing about. And I think it would be wonderful on the desert island to be able to look up at the sky and learn about it. So I'd like the biggest book available on astronomy, particularly with reference to the hemisphere where I am.
And your luxury?
Now, my luxury, I've got an awful feeling you're going to deny it to me, so I'm going to ask for 2 luxuries. My second choice first, because I have an awful feeling you're going to say no to my first choice. My second choice is a bag of golf clubs, a plentiful supply of golf balls, and just as a little extra, if you'll allow it, 18 baked bean tins, which I would put into the sand to be the hole.
Well, you can have that. Yes, that's all right.
I can.
Yes, but what's the first choice?
My first choice would be King's College Chapel, to take it with me. Now, you allowed John Major the Oval.
This is true.
So it would be very, very unfair if you didn't allow me King's College Chapel.
And it's so much more original than the golf clubs anyway, so I think you can take the chapel.
That would be marvellous, because I shall be able to sit there looking at the sun streaming through the windows. And I never had time when I was there to look at those windows carefully. And I'll be able to see the carvings and the stone and wood. I'll be able to examine them, because when you're living in a place, you don't have time to get to know it in the same way. And it's one of the most beautiful buildings, and even my records, my chosen 8, will sound better there.
In which case, you've got to have it. So, David
Thank you
Willcocks,
very much.
Thank you very much for letting us hear your Desert Island discs.
Next week, Sue Lawley's castaway will be the saxophonist John Howell. Desert Island Discs was created by Roy Plumley and is researched by Julie Batty.